Welcome to another episode of Resetology, where conversations revolve around changing from the inside out. My name's Carissa, and I'm here today with Julie to have a conversation about safe people. Jeff is out sick today, so it's Ladies' Day on Resetology. Just you and I, but we want to have a conversation really based on the verse in Proverbs 4:23, where it says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Proverbs is full of wisdom. So just the fact that the writer says above all else, like he's putting a premium on this one statement, has always been meaningful to me. But above all else, guard your heart. It kind of begs a question, well, what's in our heart? You know, he's not talking about the organ. So that's a good starting place for us. What's in our heart? So how do we know what to protect?
Yeah, absolutely. If we think about kind of ideal state of our heart, we want our heart to be full of the fruit of the Spirit. We've got peace and joy. We've got self-control. And we can delight in God and delight in our friendships. But if we think about the things that threaten that, it's our own attitudes. It's our own vulnerabilities that cause us to let in unsafe people or cause us to keep out the right people. So just those weaknesses that keep us from flourishing in the way that God intended. And I think flourishing has a lot to do with letting the right people in. A lot of times I think we think about this verse in terms of keeping people out or, not getting into compromising relationships. But I think we can be a lot more positive about it in terms of thinking about how to flourish, how to cause our heart to flourish.
I love that. The book Boundaries by Cloud & Townsend, it's such a great book because I feel like it gave especially Christians permission to say yes and no to people and all sorts of things. But I love the word picture that they use in the book because they talk about our hearts being like a yard. And a yard has property lines. So you know where your property starts and stops versus your neighbors, and just the whole idea of you're responsible for your yard. You're not responsible for their yard. If their trash is dumping into your yard, then it's okay to push the trash back over the yard. But if we think of that in the spiritual, emotional world, it's an awesome word picture because we're responsible for our hearts, for our emotions, for our thoughts, for our feelings, for our values, our beliefs, our opinions. But we're not responsible for other people's.
Yeah.
But to your point, yards have gates. So we can decide who gets in the yard and who doesn't get in the yard.
Yeah.
And so moving it to the positive of who do we let in, who do we let have more access. I did a study several years ago about the heart in the Bible because it's in the Bible dozens and dozens of times. I'm like, so what's the Bible mean with the heart? Because I think there's only a handful of times where it's actually referring to the organ. As best as I could understand, it's like a mixture of soul and spirit. So the soul being the mind, the will, and the emotions, and spirit being that place where we communicate with God.
Yeah.
So if we think of it in terms of that, guarding our heart means I guard my calling, my faith, my belief, my thought life, my emotions, my limits, my will, my decisions, my choices, my opinions. That's a lot that we're guarding. And that's a lot to be responsible for. But it's also something that we need to make sure we're distinguishing where I start and where I stop. And where you start and where you stop, so that I'm not crossing a boundary with you and you're not crossing a boundary with me. So a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
So I like this question. How does our heart let us know when someone is pushing a boundary?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's kind of two ways. One is where we feel like someone's trying to be invasive towards us, like trying to be asking questions that they shouldn't be asking or wanting information that they really haven't proven that they can be trusted with, or they might have ulterior motives for wanting that information, or they might have ulterior motives for the relationship in general. They're people that haven't shown that they really want to help us flourish. They're more interested in being takers than givers. In terms of ourselves too, I think that we need to be cognizant of our own proclivities. Like if we're in a vulnerable spot, we could be given to trusting the wrong people or to oversharing or to trying to be people pleasers and ceding some of the authority of our land to people that really can't be trusted with it.
Yeah, I think one of the ways that I know is I feel this sense of protest rise up in me. And part of that is being in touch with our feelings. I know that can sound kind of soft maybe, but we're made in the image of God and God gave us emotions. And our emotions are alerting us that something's going on the inside.
Yeah.
And so when I feel a sense of protest or anger or frustration, or it's my innards, the Bible says my innards instructed me. I think David says that, telling me that someone's crossing a boundary. So it's good to get curious about, why do I feel this rising up in me? Is this person getting pushy about their beliefs, about their opinions, about what I should do with my life? But it's that sense of protest is telling me that a boundary is being crossed.
And don't you find that sometimes it's something that you sense physically, even before cognitively or emotionally? Like our bodies start to tense up, or we start to get fidgety, or I always want to like crunch on something when I'm feeling angry about something, but our bodies let us know if we're clued in that something's not right here.
Yeah. I was in a Reset Together group a week or so ago, and we asked the question, where do you feel it in your body? You know, some people put their hand on their neck, some people in their stomach, some people in their chest. But even tuning into where do I feel it in my body helps us to be more in tune with that alarm going off. And then on the other side of that, because we want to be cognizant when someone else is crossing a boundary with us, but we also want to be aware of, when am I crossing a boundary with other people? So one of the questions we ask and Reset Together is, how can you tell when you're pushing a boundary?
Yeah.
Because it's really important to have that other awareness of what can you see going on with the other person where you know you've crossed a boundary. And so people will say things like, they start to look away, they're making less eye contact, even their posture turns away from me. They kind of, start making their way toward the door, or they stop talking back. You know, the conversation was mutual and they just have shut down verbally. So those are things that are really important to be aware of as well, as far as, how can I tell when I'm pushing a boundary?
Yeah. And pushing the boundary, I think we probably need to break that down, like in terms of what does it mean to push someone else's boundary? And I think it's whether we're starting to lean too much emotionally, like we are lacking self-awareness in terms of oversharing or getting into topics that may be sensitive for them, that make them uncomfortable, that places they just don't really want to go, or we're trying to take without appreciating the cost. Sometimes we can kind of go to two extremes, right? Like one where we don't want to reach out to other people for help, and another where we just start to lean too much without recognizing or appreciating the cost to the other person. And so I think that self-awareness is really important, as well as building the capability to have hard conversations. My sister is always the one that hosts family gatherings. She's centrally located. She's got the tribe of little ones and places for them to play. And so I do periodically have to ask her, are you comfortable with us coming over? I don't want to assume, right? It's always a little bit awkward to think about, okay, there's a holiday coming up. Are we gathering at your place? What can I bring? Is it easier to host in a neutral location? That's just one example, right? Another example where, I've been cognizant of probably crossing boundaries is if there's an issue that I feel very passionate about, and I can get pretty fired up on issues that I'm passionate about. And I have to appreciate that not everybody really finds those like hot button topics as exciting as I do, right? So I really have to measure, who can I go there with, and for whom is it just like breaking their peace? And they really prefer not to engage on, some of those tough topics. So that's, looking for that reciprocation, and then having the self-awareness to be able to pull back and see if the temperature kind of goes down.
Yeah. Well, and the goal is not that we just have people in our lives that we agree with everything on. Same thoughts, same beliefs, same opinion, because there's no one in the world that is the exact same way as we are. But safe people, they can be connected to us, but yet in areas where we're separate or different or have different opinions, they can still stay connected, be civil, have civil conversations and discussions, but also understand, okay, this is just a space where we're not going to agree, but it doesn't mean that we can't be friends, we can't stay connected. That's actually one of the signs of unsafe people, is really rigid thinking, and people that don't think like me, believe like me, value the things that I value. they're outside of my circle.
Yep.
And it's such a hallmark of safe people is to stay connected, but have space for their own opinions.
Yes.
I think we've all heard the phrase, these are my people, or it's kind of popular now to say, this is my tribe. The implication is that these people get me.
Yeah.
They let me be on the outside who I am on the inside. So what does it feel like to be around safe people?
Yeah. I just keep going back to that word flourishing, right? Like you do get that sense that they want you to flourish. They're not all ears because they're just trying to hear gossip or hear information that they can use against you or use to belittle you or argue with you, but they're really interested in you and your flourishing. I think that's what allows us to let our guards down is, when we know that people have that right attitude towards us. We can have commonalities that make it easier to identify as our tribe, in terms of like beliefs or hobbies or what have you, or a stage in life. But I think it goes beyond that with that posture of the other person that you sense that they want you to flourish.
I think some hallmarks for me is that it's mutual. So for instance, they can, what we always call, get in the well. With the hard parts of life, they know how to be present, how to listen, how to provide empathy, but it goes both ways. So they know how to do that with me, but they also allow me to do it with them.
Yeah.
Because if they can't show the weaker sides of life, it's just going to be hard to connect. So it's mutual in that sense. Same thing with celebrating the good things in life. You're talking about flourishing.
Yeah.
So having this for you stance that I'm for you and I know that you're for me, and when something good happens, you're going to celebrate with me. It's mutual. And then the same thing with embracing reality. There needs to be a tough conversation. If one of us needs to confront the other person in love or give some feedback that might be hard to hear, they can receive that. And likewise, they feel like they can do that to me and I'll receive it. And we need that. We need feedback to grow. We need empathy to grow. We need all of that. So it's mutually beneficial. But then there's the freedom, like we were talking about earlier, where I can still be myself. I can still have my own opinion. We don't have to agree on everything, but we can stay connected.
Yeah. It's such a treasure, when we are able to find people that we have common ground with and that want us to flourish. I think it's such a treasure.
Yeah. So then on the flip side, what are some characteristics of unsafe people? We could just say the opposite of everything we just said, but
Yeah, I think unsafe people tend to have their own agenda and they're not in the relationship for mutual flourishing, but they've got an agenda in the relationship, and the relationship is as useful to them as your ability to achieve their agenda or their goals. That I think is really unsafe. Or people that, we all have needs, but I think where people start to try to make you responsible for their lives, I think that starts to cross the line into unsafe.
There's a lot that we could unpack here, but if we go back to it being mutual, the flip side of that is that the relationship is all about one person, or an unsafe person won't let the light in, won't let truth in. They get defensive, they flip it around and make it about you. There's just not this mutual sense of we can be honest with one another, or we don't get to see the weak side. And that's the side that we can connect with. So it's just always a red flag if somebody doesn't want to be vulnerable, doesn't want to show their weak side. You can't connect with somebody like that.
Yeah.
And there's the obvious ones, people that distort reality, whether that's straight up lying or deception or manipulation or flattery. We have to live in the space of reality, right? And so anytime someone is going to manipulate the truth, big red flag.
Yeah.
So how do we have healthy boundaries with unsafe people?
Oh, man. Yeah. I think the first thing to recognize is that when we're challenged with boundaries with unsafe people, it's often because they are people that we want so much to experience safety with, like our family or like our church community or like work colleagues that we have to work closely with. I mean, we want to encounter safety. And so I think the first step, in some cases, just to grieve what we would want to be and what isn't, you know? I think that happens especially generationally when people look at the world differently, grieving those expectations versus reality of how we're able to manage the relationship. I think the second part then is making a commitment to the kind of people that we want to be. And the kind of people that we want to be are people that are committed to flourishing, to other people flourishing first, and also committed to our own flourishing. And to know that may look different than the way that we want it to look. But, you know, not condemning the person, not disparaging the person, but also not sharing the things that we long so much to be able to share with them, the joys that we want to be able to share with them, the disappointments, the frustrations, things that we want to be able to share with them. We have to redirect that energy and to just recognize that that's a loss.
I think just in a practical sense, with boundaries, we have to communicate them. A lot of times things are assumed. We assume that somebody knows we don't want to be talked to a certain way. We assume that they realize that their demands are too much on us.
Yeah.
But a lot of times they don't know.
Yep.
And so we start to get resentful and we're holding stuff inside. But the truth is we really haven't communicated to them
yeah, that's
that
true.
I can only give this much time or only have this many resources.
Yeah.
And so part of setting healthy boundaries is we have to communicate it. And a lot of times we avoid that because we don't like hard conversations.
Yep.
The truth is, if somebody has pushed a boundary and pushed a boundary and pushed a boundary, so like trash in our yard, when we start pushing it back, at first there's going to be protest on their side because everything that we were feeling, that heaviness and our sense of protest, when we push it back on them, now they're feeling it.
Yeah.
So a lot of times it gets worse before it gets better because it's back in their yard where they should be, but they're feeling the weight of it. We can communicate it and we need to follow through on what we've communicated. So like saying, I can help you on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, but I'm not available Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then we need to follow through with that boundary.
Yep.
They may get upset at first, but in the long run, they respect us more.
Yeah.
Hopefully the weight of it being in their yard helps them to make adjustments and change. And there's a million different examples that we can use, but I think a lot is assumed when we don't communicate clearly.
Yeah, and it leaks out too, right? Like either passive aggressive or sometimes we can go overboard to accommodate. Like we can start to try to override our own feelings. And then that just makes it worse when we do push back because it comes out of the blue for the person. Or they notice that we're off, but we haven't communicated why. And it can make it a lot worse than just being able to say in the beginning, this is how I need this to look. This is how I need this arrangement to look. This is how I need our conversation to look.
And it's so about how we communicate it. And a lot of that is we can't wait until we're ready to uncork on somebody.
Right.
But it's communicating it in grace and in love, but not steering away from the truth.
Yep.
Respecting the relationship, saying how much they mean to us, but communicating the hard truth. I love these questions from the book Boundaries by Cloud & Townsend. And these are filters that help us guard our heart. But I think the answers to these questions are really profound in terms of when is it time for me to set a boundary? So here's the questions. Is this something this person should be doing for themselves? If I do this for them, will I feel resentful? That's that alarm going off. Do I have the time, resources, or energy to invest here, or will it take me away from what God is calling me to do? And then the last one, if I've done something like this for this person before, did this person become more responsible and grateful or less? Answering those questions is really telling because sometimes we think we're helping and we're actually hurting, or we're interrupting the law that God put into the universe of sowing and reaping. And we're not allowing the proper reaping in their life. And that's one of the ways that God helps all of us learn and grow.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's hard though, because I mean, how many of us were raised to be able to know how to express ourselves, right? It's a lot of times it was either like silence or explosiveness for so many folks growing up. And so it's something that we need to be intentional about because it's not something that comes naturally.
No, I don't know a lot of people that grow up and just have the natural ability to have really hard conversations.
Yep.
You know, most people, it's really an acquired skill that we have to learn.
Yep.
So when we talk about a subject like this, it can sound like labeling. You're safe and you're unsafe. Like you're on the naughty list and you're on the nice list. So it can come across kind of judgy, even like you're not safe and here's your boundary and get out of my yard. And
yeah, no, absolutely. I think so. To cite another Henry Cloud book, his book Necessary Endings gives such great phrasing for this, which is he always comes back to, this is what my expectations are.
Right.
When you're able to meet those expectations, we can proceed. But if you're not, then we can't, or until you are. And we don't necessarily need to phrase things like that with people, but I do think we need to say, in order for our hearts to flourish, this is what we need. This is how we need to be treated. This is how we need people to talk to us. This is how we need people to communicate with us. And the people that are able to do that, we can work with, we can be close to, and the people that aren't, we communicate what we need. And if it's not happening, then it's essentially their decision. So rather than saying like, I'm judging that person or that's, it's a terrible person, it's more like, this is the standards that I have for a relationship. This is the standards that I have for a friendship. And either they're going to meet it or they're not. So it puts the ball back in the other person's court as opposed to us trying to play cop.
And it's not bridge burning. There's still a way. Go back to the gates. There's a way into the yard.
Yeah.
The best relationships have clear, healthy, direct communication.
Yes.
That's what boundaries are all about. And so this is the way back in. However we say it, this is the way back into my heart, in my yard, communicating that clearly. A lot of times with judgment, we'll say, oh, you're so judgmental, or the Bible says don't judge. Well, it does, but there's also a scripture that says judge correctly.
Yep.
So we're not supposed to not make judgments.
Right.
We're just not supposed to make unrighteous judgments. Evaluating is, I've observed firsthand this behavior over time. Heard it with my own ears, seen it with my own eyes. And based on that, I've made a judgment. I don't have to say it out loud to everybody, but I can't trust you because you broke my confidence, or I've heard you talking about other people behind their back.
Yeah.
But we're making a judgment that I can't really trust this person. And we are supposed to make judgments about that because above all else, we're supposed to guard our hearts.
Right.
And so it's making righteous judgments. We have to be really careful that the judgments we're making aren't based on relationships that we've had a long time ago, hurts and pains that we've had a long time ago, and we're projecting those on to a current situation. So we're telling ourselves stories that aren't true about this current person. We just have to be really careful that we're not bringing old baggage into making those judgments.
Yeah. There's a story at the beginning of 2 Samuel where David is approached by an Amalekite soldier, and the Amalekites were the enemy of the Israelites. But this Amalekite soldier had somehow gotten left behind or broke out of his group. He came to David and said, King Saul is dead. I killed him. Here are his crown and, his essentially his symbols of power. I'm giving them to you. And David goes through a series of questions to try to understand what happened. And essentially, the young man takes credit for killing the man who was David's enemy, effectively. And David judges him based on his own words. Like, he judges him to be an unsafe person based on his own words, where the man thought that he could come to him and be manipulative by taking credit for taking out the person who was his enemy, giving him the symbols of power.
Yeah.
David recognized that as, no, this person is unsafe. They're a threat. They're trying to be manipulative, and they're not someone that I can trust not to do the same thing to me that he did to King Saul. I mean, our examples in our personal lives aren't nearly as dramatic, but what I love about that story is just the precedent that David sets, where he wasn't prejudicial to the Amalekite for being from the tribe that tended to be against the Israelites, but he let the man's own words speak for him, and he let the man's own words indicate the condition of his heart and whether or not he was safe. And I think that's a great model for us, where we're not prejudicial, but we do ask the right questions and we do have the right discernment to know, is this someone that I can trust what they say? Is this someone that I want to trust to be close to me?
Yeah. And then if we decide to give that person less access, we also have to allow the grace of God to work in their life and to be open to the possibility that they change for the positive, and that we, using wisdom, give them a second chance to show that they've changed and grown, rather than you're locked out of the yard forever.
Yep.
Because
I put you in this bucket.
Yeah, you're on the unsafe list.
Yeah.
And so you're banished.
Yep.
Yeah, we have to be really careful with that because there are times in our lives where we weren't very safe.
Yes.
Some of us, maybe we weren't safe at all,
Mm-hmm.
but God's been gracious to us and we've grown and we've become more safe. And so people were gracious with us. We need to be gracious with other people. There's another story in the Bible in the New Testament. You kind of have to piece it together, but it's really interesting. Paul and Mark are really close, and then Mark abandons him. In our language, it's Mark wasn't safe. He got going when the going got hard.
Mm-hmm.
But then later on in one of Paul's letters, he's writing and he says, bring me my parchments and bring Mark.
Yeah.
So we don't know what happened, but somewhere along the way, he must have proven himself, he being Mark, that he was safe again.
I love it.
I mean, hey, he's in prison. He wants his parchments and Mark.
Mm-hmm.
He must have kept the bridge open and Mark made some adjustments.
Yeah.
And that's such an important lesson for us.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening. We hope this message encouraged you. For additional resources or information on our upcoming events, head to resetministries.us. That's resetministries.us.